My beloved child, stop scrolling for just a moment. Do not let this message disappear into the noise around you, because in this fictional spiritual story, heaven is drawing your attention to something that happened last night. Something shifted while the world was quiet. Something hidden came closer to the surface. And before you dismiss the feeling in your chest as imagination, listen carefully, because the message is not here to make you afraid. It is here to awaken your discernment. Last night, while your soulmate was asleep or moving through an ordinary moment of their life, a strange heaviness surrounded their thoughts. They may not have understood it. They may have awakened suddenly, stared into the darkness, remembered a face, heard a sound outside, or felt an unexplained need to become still. They may have thought it was nothing, but in this story, heaven saw what they could not yet see, and there is a reason you are hearing this now. Pause here. Take a breath. Let the noise fade for a moment. Because the warning is not about panic, and it is not telling you to accuse someone, confront someone, or assume that a real person is secretly plotting against the one you love. This is a fictional divine message about discernment, hidden intentions, emotional danger, and the protection that comes when truth is finally brought into the light. Something about your soulmate situation has been concealed. And last night, that hidden situation changed. For some time, your soulmate has been surrounded by people, conversations, and circumstances that did not all carry the same intentions. Some people genuinely wished them well. Some were simply passing through their life. And one particular energy in this story has been different, not because heaven wants you to fear it, but because your soulmate has been ignoring a pattern that their spirit has repeatedly asked them to notice. They have been giving too much access to someone who has not earned it. They have been explaining themselves to someone who does not deserve every explanation. They have been trusting words while overlooking behavior. And last night, something happened that made the difference impossible to ignore. Perhaps it was only a dream, perhaps it was a conversation, perhaps it was a sudden memory, perhaps it was the realization that someone they trusted had not been telling the entire truth. Whatever form it took, your soulmate felt something inside them whisper, "Pay attention." That whisper is where this story begins, because there are moments when protection does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes protection arrives as hesitation. Sometimes it arrives as a delayed decision. Sometimes it arrives as a sudden feeling that says, "Do not go there yet." Sometimes it arrives through a person canceling plans, changing direction, refusing an invitation, or deciding to wait one more night before making a choice. And sometimes, child, protection arrives through you hearing a message at exactly the moment you were ready to scroll past it. You may have clicked on this title casually. You may have thought it was just another spiritual message. You may even have felt a strange pull before pressing play. In this fictional story, that pull matters. Because something happened last night that your soulmate has not fully understood yet. They were being shown a choice. One path looked ordinary, the other path carried a warning, and the most frightening part was not that someone wanted to harm them physically. The deeper danger was manipulation. the kind that begins so quietly that a person does not realize they are being influenced until their confidence, peace, relationships, and judgment have already started changing. Someone in their environment may have been feeding doubt, someone may have been twisting information, someone may have been presenting themselves as a friend while secretly benefiting from your soulmate's confusion. Someone may have been encouraging separation, not because they wanted what was best for your soulmate, but because your soulmate's happiness made them uncomfortable. And there is one detail that makes this story even more mysterious: your soulmate already sensed it. They just did not trust themselves enough to believe what they were sensing. They noticed the strange tone, they noticed the contradiction, they noticed how one person's behavior changed whenever your soulmate mentioned love, commitment, success, or you. They noticed how certain conversations always ended with them feeling guilty, confused, or smaller than before. But instead of asking why, they blamed themselves. They said, "Maybe I'm overthinking." They said, "Maybe I'm being too sensitive." They said, "Maybe this person really does care." And that is how hidden influence survives. It does not always enter through obvious cruelty. Sometimes it enters wearing the face of concern. Sometimes the dangerous voice sounds gentle. Sometimes manipulation arrives wrapped in advice. Sometimes the person causing confusion is the same person claiming to protect you from it. That is why this message asks your soulmate to awaken, not to become suspicious of everyone, not to live in fear, not to search for an enemy behind every door, but to observe, to slow down, to look at patterns instead of promises. Because heaven does not need you to become paranoid in order to become discerning. And last night, your soulmate received the first clue. It came at an unexpected hour. The room was quiet, their mind should have been resting, but suddenly, they remembered you. Not casually, not like an ordinary memory. They remembered a moment when you had tried to warn them without even realizing you were warning them. Maybe you once said, "Something about that situation doesn't feel right." Maybe you noticed a change in their behavior after certain conversations. Maybe you asked them why they seemed distant after spending time with a particular person. Your soulmate remembered that, and for the first time, they wondered whether you had noticed something they were too emotionally involved to recognize. That thought stayed with them. Then another memory surfaced, a conversation from weeks or months ago. A sentence that seemed harmless at the time suddenly sounded different. A question that once seemed casual now seemed intrusive. A joke that once seemed meaningless suddenly revealed jealousy. A piece of advice that once sounded protective suddenly appeared controlling. And your soulmate sat quietly with the realization that the pattern had been there all along. They had simply been looking at each moment separately. Last night, they saw the pattern. That is when fear could have taken over. But heaven brought something else. Clarity, a calmness settled over them, not a voice screaming, "Danger." Not an invisible command telling them whom to hate, just a quiet inner knowing, "Be careful with your trust." That sentence changed the atmosphere. And somewhere in the unseen world of this fictional story, an archangel stood at the threshold of your soulmate's path, not as a figure of terror, but as a symbol of divine protection, wisdom, and courage. The archangel did not destroy anyone. The archangel did not attack anyone. The archangel simply illuminated what had been hidden, and under that light, your soulmate saw something they had been refusing to admit. Someone around them had been trying to influence the way they viewed you. Not openly, not directly, through subtle comments, through carefully chosen questions, through selective information, through reminders of old wounds, through suggestions that made your soulmate doubt whether they deserved happiness. And every time your soulmate moved closer to peace, the same energy seemed to pull them backward. That was the pattern, and now the pattern had been exposed. But there is something even more important you need to understand. The person in this story does not necessarily see themselves as a villain. That is what makes this situation complicated. Sometimes people hurt others because they are wounded themselves. Sometimes jealousy disguises itself as concern, sometimes insecurity disguises itself as protection. Sometimes a person cannot tolerate seeing someone they once influenced become independent, and sometimes the person who fears losing control will do everything possible to make another person question their own judgment. Your soulmate has been caught in the middle of that emotional storm. They have been trying to keep everyone happy. They have been avoiding confrontation. They have been carrying other people's expectations, and while they were trying to preserve peace around them, they were slowly losing peace within themselves. Last night, something broke. Not your soulmate, the illusion that keeping everyone comfortable was the same thing as being safe. The illusion that silence always prevents conflict. The illusion that loyalty means ignoring what your heart knows. The illusion that love requires tolerating manipulation. And when that illusion broke, your soulmate began remembering you. That is where you enter this message. You were not remembered because you were perfect. You were remembered because your presence represented something different, truth. You may have challenged them. You may have asked questions they did not want to answer. You may have noticed when their smile was hiding sadness. You may have been the person who could tell something was wrong even when they said everything was fine. That kind of connection can be uncomfortable, because when someone sees through your mask, you cannot easily pretend. Your soulmate may have pulled away from you at times because your honesty forced them to confront parts of themselves they were avoiding, and perhaps that distance hurt you. Who has access to information they should not have. That was the moment the atmosphere changed completely. Your soulmate did not respond. They stared at the screen. They reread the message, and then they remembered something from earlier, a conversation, a name, a promise, a detail they had forgotten. Everything began connecting, and just when they were about to make a decision, they noticed one more thing. A detail so small that almost anyone would have missed it. But your soulmate did not miss it this time, and that detail revealed that the person they had been trusting might not have been acting alone. There was another connection, another conversation, another hidden piece, and suddenly, the story became much bigger than jealousy. Your soulmate realized that someone had been shaping the narrative around them. Someone had been deciding what information reached them. Someone had been filtering what they heard. Someone had been quietly influencing what they believed about you, and the most painful part was this. Your soulmate had defended that person, they had defended them to you. They had defended them to themselves, they had defended them even when something inside whispered otherwise. Now regret began rising. They remembered every time they chose another person's explanation over their own intuition. They remembered every time they dismissed your concerns. They remembered every time you looked hurt and they assumed you were asking for too much. And suddenly, they understood that your silence may not have been anger, it may have been exhaustion. You were tired of fighting a battle you could not even see. But this story is not ending there, because heaven was not revealing the entire truth last night, only the first layer. There is something your soulmate has not discovered yet. Something connected to the person who sent that message, something connected to a decision your soulmate was preparing to make, a decision that could have changed the direction of their life. And if they had made that decision without stopping to question what was happening around them, they might have walked directly into a situation they were not emotionally prepared to handle. That is why the warning came now, not tomorrow, not next month, now. Because sometimes divine protection is simply the interruption that gives a person time to think. Your soulmate has been given that interruption. And so have you. Do not chase shadows. Do not accuse anyone, do not let this story convince you that you are surrounded by enemies. Instead, remember the deeper message, watch patterns, protect your peace, trust evidence, respect boundaries, and when something truly feels wrong, seek grounded help from someone you trust, because wisdom is not fear, wisdom is awareness without panic, and your soulmate is beginning to learn that difference. But there is one more thing. Before the night ended, your soulmate opened an old conversation between you. They scrolled, they stopped at a message, they read it again. And something about those words struck them differently this time. They realized you had been telling them something without ever directly saying it. They realized you had noticed the change. They realized you had felt the distance. And then, for the first time, your soulmate whispered a sentence they had been too proud to say for a long time. I should have listened. The room became quiet, their eyes closed, and in that silence, they remembered the exact moment when everything between you began to change, the moment when another person's words entered the story, the moment when your soulmate made a choice based on information they now suspect was incomplete. The moment that may explain why they suddenly became distant from you. And then they remembered something else, a name, a conversation. A promise made behind closed doors, a promise you were never supposed to know about. Your soulmate reached for their phone again, their hand stopped above the screen, because they had just discovered one final message from last night. And this time, it was not from the person they suspected, it was from someone they never expected to hear from. The message contained only one sentence that could change everything they thought they knew. And when your soulmate read those words, they finally understood why they had awakened in the middle of the night with that strange feeling in their heart. The message said something that made them freeze. Because it was not a warning about what might happen tomorrow, it was a revelation about what had already happened, and the truth was far closer to your soulmate than either of you realized.